Hello, good evening. Welcome to the New Bedford Whaling Museum's 2023 Sailors Series Lecture. My name is Emily Mead, and I am Director of Philanthropy for the museum, so I oversee the museum's fundraising and membership activities. So I'll start by welcoming our members, and if you are not yet a member of the museum, you can come see me in the reception after the talk tonight, and I will be happy to help you get set up. Our members are enjoying 50% off their tickets this evening, so thank you very much for joining us. As all of us on the South Coast gear up for another beautiful summer in and on the water, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our 2023 Sailor Series. This is the first time we've been back in person for some time, and it's wonderful to see a full house. Every year, the Sailor Series is supported by a gift from Ruth and Hope Atkinson, and it is also supported in part by the Samuel D. Rositsky Lecture Fund. We're pleased that this year's series is also sponsored in part by the Babbitt Steam Specialty Company right here in New Bedford and Barden's Boat Yard on beautiful Sippican Harbor. I really wanted to extend a big welcome to Will Sofrin, who will be joining us this evening. Before I do, I wanted to mention that the next lecture in the series will be a talk by the curator of the New York Yacht Club's collections. She will be here on October 19th. We just confirmed this, so please mark your calendars for that too. And also in the meantime, they will be hosting a screening of the movie Master and Commander here in this theater on Saturday afternoon, this Saturday afternoon, the 13th. So mark your calendars. But for now, it is my pleasure to introduce Will Sofrin. He is a master shipwright. He has taught at MIT, and he has built boats for some people with marquee names and very excellent, very fine taste. He's also a former professional sailor who has a sailor and a licensed captain who has tracked more than 30,000 blue water miles. He also, at 21 years old, took off with a crew of 30 oddballs to sail a replica 18th-century warship from Newport to Hollywood for its star turn and Master and Commander. So he joins us to recount his adventures, and I welcome Will Sofrin.
Wow, I am so happy to be here tonight. I used to come to this museum as a kid on field trips. I mean, it's really come full circle for me, so true honor. A little feedback. I'd love to ask everyone if you could all hold your questions till the end. I'm going to, no interruptions, and I promise I'm going to answer every question, and we'll take as long as we need to do that, and then there's going to be the reception afterwards, where if you're a little shy in front of the group, you can come talk to me then, okay? Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story about a motley crew of sailors who did whatever it took to get the job done. See that guy in red up there? That's me. Wishing I had remembered to go to the bathroom before free climbing 60 feet up in the air, 70 knots of wind. When I was 21 years old, I was hired to sail the American tall ship Rose, Newport, Rhode Island to San Diego to make the movie Master and Commander starring Russel Crowe. And that's our ship over his shoulder. Our journey began in Newport. We departed in January, terrible time of year to sail through the North Atlantic. We sailed down to Puerto Rico. Our journey then continued on from Puerto Rico to Panama, where we then transited the Panama Canal. We then continued north along the western seaboard of North America until arriving in San Diego. This is a profile diagram of Rose. Rose was 180 feet length overall, 130 feet on deck. She had a 32-foot beam, displaced a 15-foot draft, displaced 500 tons of water, had 17 sails totaling 13,000 square feet of sail area, and the top of her mainmast was 130 feet above the water. So, what's it take to sail a ship like Rose? Well, for starters, it takes a lot of muscle. The original Rose sailed with a crew of 200 men. We did it with a crew of 30. Now, granted, we had engines, electricity, plumbing. These modern amenities are great, but they didn't help us set or trim the sails like the crew had to do 200 years ago. In order for us to pull off our mission, we needed great leadership. And that started with Captain Richard Bailey, who then hired our 3 officers, Tony, Andy, and Christina, who were followed by our cook, bosun, engineer, and then finally our lowly deckhands, of which I was one. So, how do I fit into this picture? Well, for starters, I grew up in upstate Connecticut, and we didn't sail a lot there, but I did love Popeye. And after graduating from high school, I enrolled at the International Yacht Restoration School in Newport, where I learned the fine art of restoring and building wooden yachts. I loved it. It was an incredible experience. But when I wasn't learning how to build boats, I was out sailing them. And that eventually led to me getting paid to sail on the Newport's 12-meter fleet. And once I knew I could get paid to sail, I found my calling. 2001 marked the 150th anniversary of the race that became known as the America's Cup. And to mark that celebration was the America's Cup Jubilee. And I somehow landed a job on America's oldest 12-meter yacht, Ottawa, who had long since fallen from grace when Earl Macmillan formed a syndicate to restore her. We had a year to get this boat together and ready to race. As you can see, it was a lot of work, but we pulled it off. She was launched in time to be shipped over to Europe to race in England, Italy, Monaco, and France. When I was 21 years old, I was living on this boat on the French Riviera. My life was awesome. But when the job ended, the season was over, I had to return to Newport, homeless and without a job and broke. Now, Newport, Rhode Island, as we all know, was made famous as a summer-age, gilded age retreat. This is where Bob Dylan electrified folk and where Jay Leno hides out from paparazzi these days. In the summer, the streets swell with tourists. But come winter, Newport becomes a barren wasteland. And being 21 years old at the time, I thought the world revolved around me. I thought I'd come back and there'd be some beautiful yacht with a mate's position waiting for me to sail down to the Caribbean, but that wasn't the case. All the boats had sailed south, and I had no opportunities. So Casey, the captain of Ottawa, sent me down to Rose to go beg for work. Now, how did Rose come to be? Well, in 1969, historian John Millar, only 24 years old at the time, commissioned the acclaimed shipbuilding yard Smith & Rowland of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, to build a replica of the 1757 HMS Rose for the American bicentennial celebration. Rose was built for a mere $300,000. That's equivalent to $2.4 million today. Well, despite the skepticism, Millar pulls it off, and he delivers Rose in time. Here we see a picture of her docked in Newport's waterfront at the bicentennial celebration. Here she is on a period postcard. But what happens to Rose after the celebration's over? There's no real plan. She falls into a state of disrepair and decay, and nearly a decade goes by until Connecticut businessman Kay Williams purchases Rose. Williams is the owner of the family-owned and operated marina, Captain's Cove Seaport, located in Black Rock Harbor, Connecticut. Williams puts together a crew, hires Richard Bailey, and they rebuild the ship while she's floating in the water from the waterline up. The task was immense, but it became a community project, and eventually Williams' goal was achieved when Rose was certified as America's only Class A sailing school vessel. Rose then goes on to offer educational opportunities to the public, offering sail training as a sail training platform, until being acquired by 20th-century Fox to make the movie Master and Commander. Okay, let's bring you back now to 2001. Rose was the antithesis of all my career ambitions, but I didn't have a choice. I was told to ask for a man named Tony, and I had visions of some guy with a beard and tattoos and tar covered and raspy, someone who looks like this guy. Instead, I end up meeting a young Tom Cruise lookalike, except 4 inches taller. And he's oddly normal and cool. He asks me a couple questions and then invites me down into the ship's interior. We walk down 2 flights of steps and we come out onto the gun deck. And this is sort of like the living room of the ship. This is where the crew hangs out and eats their meals. And those tables that you see, that's where the cannons would be mounted at the gun ports. And as we're walking forward, asking questions and answering them, Tony brings me up to the bow where there's this little hatch. And he lifts it up and he brings me down this tiny little compartment. And this is where he offers me the job. For 25 cents an hour and all the salt water I can drink, I can sail to Hollywood to make a movie. Now, Tom Rothman is one of the most accomplished men in Hollywood. At the time, he was the co-chairman of 20th Century Fox. Today, Rothman is the chairman and CEO of Sony Motion Picture Group. He's responsible for movies like Much Ado About Nothing, Titanic, Avatar, and he loves Patrick O'Brian books. So, who's Patrick O'Brian? Well, for starters, he's an English author who pretended to be Irish. Don't know why. Well, O'Brien's best known for his 20-book series framed around the relationship of Captain Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin during the Napoleonic-era wars. Rothman reads all the books, then buys the rights to make a movie, and he spends 10 years trying to do this. And that's when director Peter Weir comes in, who just won an honorary Oscar for his work on movies such as Witness, Dead Poets Society, and The Truman Show. Rothman pitched Weir the job 3 times until Weir accepted. With a plan in place, Weir set off to go find the starship of his movie. And he went to the Lunenburg, Nova Scotia Tall Ship Festival in 2000, where he found Rose, the very ship that O'Brien himself said was much like the surprise that he wrote about in his books, as depicted in this painting by marine artist Jeff Hunt. With his ship secured, Weir got to work writing the script. Well, I think it's safe to say we all know that I accept the job. And I move on the first week of November. And to say the least, the living accommodations, it's a little rough on board. But fortunately, I was able to convince my best friend Jared to take the job with me because I was too chicken to take it alone. 3 days after moving onto the ship, we motor her over to Newport Shipyard to begin a massive refit. First item on the list is repowering the ship. To do that, we had to get these old engines up and out of the engine room. And that meant hanging an I-beam from the gun deck so we could set up chain lifts. Chain lift those engines up. Then they were put on a cart and slid forward so a crane could hoist them up out of the ship's cargo hatches. A few days later, the new Caterpillar 3406 diesel engines arrive. Check out those ponies. They, in turn, are craned into the ship and then lowered into the engine room so they can be set up and installed. Now, while all this engine work is going on, I, as the ship's carpenter, am tasked with rebuilding the mast partners on the foremast. Now, the mast partners are sort of that structural element that prevents the mast from shredding the deck to pieces. A few days later, Rose is towed over to the railway at the shipyard so she can be hauled out. Scaffolding is built up around the ship, and soon there's grinders and caulking mallets and banging, and new planks are going on. I mean, the work list kept growing and growing, but so did our crew. And that meant a lot of mixed personalities, some good, some bad. And I'll tell you, if my wife was here, she'd tell you all that my personality is a bit of an acquired taste. So I'm not saying it's anyone's fault that we didn't get along all the time. Now, we did have to learn how to put our differences aside. It was important. We were there for one mission. Our job was to get Rose ready so we could sail her to California. And mind you, it wasn't all that bad. We did have a lot of fun, and we made the best of every moment that we could. Here we've got Captain Bailey washing his dog Jackal in the galley sink. And here's our Christmas tree lashed to the ship's wheel. But after 2 months of work, the fruition of our labor comes to be. Rose is ready to be launched and put back into the water. Her bottom is painted, her bow has been coppered, and soon she floats. To reward us for all of our hard work, the officers throw a costume-themed farewell party with lots of rum. And it was great. We had a wonderful time. Look at those smiles. But Still lingering in the back of our mind was, when were we going to get underway? There was not a good weather window. The router was telling Captain Bailey to do what he could do, and Hollywood was putting the pressure on him. We departed from Newport on a cold, blustery January afternoon. Oh, terrible time, right? Nobody likes boating that time of year. Here we are, Jared and myself, saying farewell with the Newport Bridge in the background. Now, the crew was broken up into 3 watches. Each watch was led by an officer, followed by an able-bodied seaman, and then 6 deckhands. Those not on watch were Captain Bailey and his dog, our engineer, our bosun, our cook, and the Hollywood reps sent with us to safeguard their investment. The officers hopped right into conducting safety drills and preparing us to operate the vessel through the evening. The next morning, hands are sent aloft as we prepare to set the square sails for the first time on this journey. All that hard work in the yard had conditioned us to work together. Within a few minutes, I know all that is great about sailing a tall ship.
So this being relatively calm compared to earlier today, shortly after we sent all this canvas, this is actually the first time I've been able to kind of comfortably take the camera out on deck.
I am overcome with excitement. I love tall ship sailing. And I'll tell you what, that sunset wasn't so bad too. It was probably the best sunset I've ever seen. The next day, we cross the Gulf Stream. We shred our winter gear and we bask and relax in this nice, warm, calm North Atlantic
Thoughts on
climate.
today?
It's an excellent day.
Beautiful day.
Oh, how naive we were. The Beaufort wind scale was created in 1805 by Royal Navy officer Francis Beaufort. It's an empirical measure that relates wind speed to observed wind speed to conditions at sea or on land. It ranges from forces 0 through 12, 12 being classified as 64 knots or more, and hurricane conditions. This is a wind barb chart showing a universal representation of wind speed and direction. Notice I've highlighted the 75-knot barb. This is a NOAA weather chart from January 13th, 2002. Notice I've highlighted that 75-knot barb right where we are. This is what hurricane conditions look like on a ship like Crowe's. All right, you see that guy in red? That's me again. I'm walking back after having inspected the forepeak to make sure our pumps are working away because we are taking on a lot of water. But you know what? I was 21. I was having a great time. I was ignorant. It was a blast. I can't say that for everyone. In this shot, Rose does a 60-degree roll. Everyone stand by. Now, I know there's a bunch of sailors here, right? Sailing's a quiet sport, right? It's elegant and beautiful. But no, we all know that boats are loud, especially wooden boats. Down below, the ship was just screaming from all the racket she was being put through. Here, Scott is explaining why the lights are out behind him. Electrical fire started in the ship. So at this point, the crew has been forbidden from sleeping below in the sleeping compartments. We've got all of our abandoned ship gear ready to go. Back up on deck. Seas continue to build. Waves are up to 20 to 30 feet. Now, where this camera footage is being taken from, we're 20 feet above the ship's waterline. Sailing a ship like Rose, it's awful in these conditions. I mean, you've got to be a man and take it. There's no Dodger or Bimini or Bridge. There's no autopilot. It's all brute muscle, and you're just taking that weather face on. Here we've got Captain Bailey wedged port quarter, the ship's rail right there, and you can see how much rolling the ship is doing. But, you know what? As the day goes on, we get used to it. We acclimate. We're smiling, telling jokes, having a great time. I love this shot because you can see the amount of pitching the ship is doing when you watch that horizon.
Alright, so Hollywood wants to see what's up. up again, and 4 ports started to blow out the starboard side, so Will and Tony have gone up to fix it.
All right, so John's just explained that one of our square sails has started to come unfurled. Tony grabs me to go aloft with him. Now, that meant free climbing up 60 feet and then out to the yard arm end. And, you know, this is that footage that I opened this film with, right? Now, it's terrifying. You get up there, and Tony says the plan is to jump on the sail and punch it as hard as you can. Now, that sail up there is like a bucking bull when you got it that close to your face. Not to mention the amount of swinging that the ship is doing. Remember that rolling we were doing earlier? We're going from side to side, 60 to 80 feet every 8 to 10 seconds. Now, there's a bit of a break in footage because John had turned his camera off to take the cover off, but we've got the sail secured and we're wrapping sail gaskets around it, which are like sail ties, making sure that nobody has to go aloft again to deal with the sail. Now, with the sail secured, Tony tells me to head back to deck. And he didn't have to tell me twice. I was happy to get down. Climbing aloft actually wasn't that bad, because I could look up the mast, look up, but descending the rig was terrifying. Because you're out over the water, you're free climbing, and every time Rose falls off a wave and hits a top, it feels like she's hitting a brick wall. The whole rig shudders as you're coming down. Now, I was white after this. I mean, I had nothing left to give. But Tony, he's a whole different animal. I mean, look at this guy. He looks like he's taking a stroll through a park. I mean, I would go to hell with this man. We make it through this weather, but not everyone does. This is Rose's sister ship, HMS Bounty, sinking in Hurricane Sandy in 2012 in very similar conditions. Of her 16-member crew, 1 died and her captain was lost at sea. Hard to believe that that flag was new 5 days earlier, let alone that we were in such dire condition 24 hours prior. The interior of the ship is destroyed. It looks worse than my daughter's bedroom on a Saturday morning. And all of our toilet paper is soaked. After a few hours and some minor sail repairs, we get our square sail set again. And we continue charging south. Now, days before, this would have seemed like a great amount of wind. But now, it's just enough to fill our sails. Soon, we sight land. Puerto Rico, land ho. Hands are sent aloft to tie up the sails and prepare the ship for docking. Now, after having nearly looked death in the eyes in the North Atlantic, I was chomping at the bits for fun. I wanted to explore this island and find a beautiful girl and have some drinks and enjoy some music and culture. But then I realized where we were docking the ship. Some half-abandoned ferry terminal that looked like the film set from the movie Mad Max. Then, adding insult to injuries, the officers told us that we had 2 days to do a major repair on the ship. During the storm, this yellow element, our upright bit that supports the bowsprit, failed, and the bowsprit got pushed into the ship. We needed to slack the rig, push the bowsprit out, then temporarily shore that bit, then reset the bowsprit and retune the rig in 2 days' time. In addition to that work, those not working on the bowsprit were sent aloft to rig up our highest sails, the T-gallants. We were given a half day off. Now, not wanting to miss a minute, we all chipped in and got a minivan and went looking for a beach. And guess what? After sailing to Puerto Rico, we got lost trying to find a beach. Here we are asking a local for directions. But eventually, we find the famed Rincon, and we get to enjoy a few hours of reprieve from the slave-like conditions on Rose. We are now a conditioned crew. When we departed from Newport, I had never set a square sail. I didn't know what was going on. But now I understand it. I really get the concept. I grasp it. I can sit back and I can relax and enjoy this incredible sleigh ride to Panama. And you know what? Everyone here knows, right? When you relax, that's when bad things happen. It was about an hour before sunset, and I was waiting in line for dinner when I heard an explosion, and there was a call for all hands on deck. And you come running up, and you see the last thing any sailor ever wants to see. We had been dismasted in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. What happened was our main topgallant mast, the highest mast up there, exploded, falling forward, causing the fore topgallant yard to snap in half. The explosion also damaged the top of our main topmast and also compromised the doubling where the main mast met the main topmast. Now, this illustration shows where we are after the dismasting. Now, I still got the main topsail and dash lines there because we thought it was a bad idea to strike that sail because of the damage to the mast. Counterintuitive to trying to decrease loads. It was probably the safest way for us to ensure that we were going to be fine. Now, I'm up on deck for 2 seconds, and yeah, you guessed it, Tony grabs me and tells me to go aloft again. I don't know why. There's 30 people on the ship. Now, there I am at the top of our tallest broken mast, trying to figure out what to do, and we've got Andy, our second mate, and then Christina, our third mate, up there with me as well. And up on the foremast, we can see Tony working with our ship's bosun, trying to figure out how to clean up that rat nest of a mess. Captain Bailey grabs the wheel. It's the only time he steered the ship on the entire journey. Here, we've got the rest of the crew on deck waiting for orders. This is a shot from my perspective looking down at Andy, and you can see the broken mast hanging over the topsail. And this is a shot of Tony's silhouette as he cuts away the fore topgallant sail. We work through the night securing the rig. Everyone gets a chance to go aloft and pitch in. But you know what? Our officers
That's a lot of good luck, ladies and gentlemen.
They are awesome at keeping everyone focused and excited about pitching in. The next morning, we continue lowering the broken elements of our rig to the deck. We are exhausted, but you carry on because that's what you do. A few days later, we arrive in Colón, Panama, port entrance city for the Atlantic for the Panama Canal. Fortunately, the owner of our boat has the biggest wallet in the world, so we were able to hire a massive crane to help with the downrigging of the ship. Now, working in Panama was terrible. The heat index was 125 degrees, and there was a lot of mumbling on deck. I mean, we had just been working nonstop. People were getting angry, and somehow our officers continued to motivate us to keep our eye on the prize. Although, I can't say it was all positive here. I mean, here, I think there's a couple fake smiles in this shot. Since departing from Newport, we had only been given a half day off in Puerto Rico. When we arrived in Panama, we were given 3 hours off. And let me tell you, after that first hour, I was ready to leave. All right, the Panama Canal, for those that don't know, is an artificial 51-mile waterway that connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific and is located at the Isthmus of Panama, dividing North and South America. Fortunately, Rose got an evening slot to go through the canal, a wonderful reprieve from that heat. Now, going through the canal means transiting 3 ascending locks that then bring your vessel up to the man-made center lake, Lake Gatton. You then transit the lake and then go through 3 descending locks. The entire process took us just over 7 hours. Once in the Pacific, we motor out to the Panamanian island of Tobago. We're in the Pacific, and I wake up to this beautiful view the next morning. To reward us for our work, the officers give us a half day off. Fortunately, I get to stand the first watch, which means I'm free to drink as much alcohol as I can that night. After standing watch, I hop on the first dinghy I can, and I go to shore, and I decide to hike up to the top of the island, get and check out the views. Some of my shipmates hung out on the beach, but eventually we all found each other at a local hotel that had a pool and very cheap pina coladas. The next morning, we depart for Mexico. Captain Bailey put 2 of our hands in our dinghy so we could shoot this incredible footage of our dismasted ship sailing. In fact, I think it's probably the only authentic footage of a dismasted frigate under sail. Well, where the Atlantic brought destruction, The Pacific brought boredom, at least for the deckhands. For the officers, the challenge kept coming. There's that saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop, and they were not going to let us be idle. So they put us to work scraping the broken spars, tarring the rig, tallowing the spars. You know, the sentiment on board is getting tense. People are talking about jumping off the ship. See how tired and worn down everyone is. Now, the officers aren't just dealing with us. There's other obstacles going on in the Pacific, like the threat of the Fanatics winds that run down through Chivas Pass. Or we even have the whole threat of actual pirates. Here we've got a relic of a Navy vessel. It's a World War II antique ship that the Mexican Navy still uses today. The pirate threat was real. We talked about arming some cannons with screws and nails, but fortunately, we were able to get by unscathed. We eventually arrive in Acapulco. A few minor dings here and there, but what's really broken is the crew morale. So the officers award us with a full 24 hours off. And you can see what that does for some people on board. With our ship docked, we take on the best that Acapulco has to offer, starting with mechanical bull riding. We then go see the famed Acapulco cliff divers. My personal favorite was bombing around downtown Acapulco in the old-fashioned Volkswagen Beetle taxi. The youngest crew member, only 16, tried bungee jumping for the first time. You know what? This is where it all clicks. All that infighting stops. I think the music, the rum, the dancing gave us the opportunity to let bygones be bygones. Our journey continues on for 2,000 more miles, and you think it would get easy at some point. Now, that's a beautiful water spout, but this photo, there's 3 water spouts. But you know what? Everyone's happier on board the ship, but Rose continues to deteriorate. But we see dolphins and whales. We have time to read books and relax a little bit. We even play a prank on Captain Bailey with this fake fish right here. Eventually, we arrive in San Diego, and it's a cold, gray day like the day we departed Newport. The sentiment on board the ship is mixed. Half the crew is happy that we've accomplished our mission, whereas the other half are sad because the chemistry we formed will now fade away. And Rose is too broken to sail. Collaboration is the process of 2 more people working together to complete a task or achieve a goal. So, how did our officers do it? How did they make this motley crew of misfits pull together? I mean, we sailed through some fierce weather, and we survived a dismasting without anyone being killed or seriously injured. We slept while others stood watch. We learned through the process of doing and teaching each other. We were colleagues, but we became so much more. We became bonded. We became a family. When I think about it, I can come up with 4 words that describe our officers and what they did for us. Starting with leadership, mentorship, stewardship, and most importantly, friendship. Well, Rose was pretty roughed up after the journey. In fact, we had to do a lot of structural work. And so Rose was brought over to the Naval Dockyard in San Diego where she was hauled out, and we began her aesthetic transformation, but really focused on getting the structural work completed. Once that was done, Rose was launched back in the water, now semi-surprise, and we brought her down to Ensenada. And this is where she completed her aesthetic transformation into HMS Surprise in the movie that we all know as Master of Command.
Courage, lads! When we board, you'll take command of the ship.
Take command of the ship. Thank you, sir.
For home! And for the prize!
See you afterwards.
Let's fly!
Now, I'm here tonight because when I was a kid, I got to read some great books in high school. I read Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer, The Perfect Storm by Sebastian Junger, and reading stories like that inspired me to feel confident about taking a path less traveled. And instead of going to college, learning how to build wooden boats. So I wrote this book because I think it's important to tell stories and to share those stories with the people around us. So I know a lot of you have read my book, and some of you are buying it, and they're going to have it for sale after this. But I'd love to ask, if you don't want to buy the book for yourself, could you buy a copy and send it to the high school you went to or a kid that you know? You know, let's get stories like this out there because it's really important for the future of America and just the next generation. I'd like to also acknowledge that we have a special guest here today. Captain Richard Bailey is sitting right here in the front row. I'd also like to say I'm excited. Something that's just sort of developed is on June 21st in Newport, there's going to be a crew reunion and a speakers panel. So if anybody's interested, you can come talk to me after this, and I'll give you the details for that. But it's going to be a pretty fun event, and it'll be the first time a lot of the crew members will have been together in the same space in 20 years. I'd love to now open up the floor for conversation or questions, if anyone's got. Now, we have microphones on either side of the aisle, so if you raise your hand, we'll pick on you, and if you can just wait to ask your question until we get the microphone in your hand so everyone here can hear the question, and everyone at home can hear it as well. So are there any questions?
Where's the ship today?
Today, Rose belongs to the San Diego Maritime Museum, and she's docked there, and she's just a dockside attraction. I don't think she's going to sail ever again, but they do a great job they've sort of redone the gun deck down below to make it feel a little bit more authentic to the period, but she's a great attraction, and the museum is a wonderful museum.
Thank you for a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. So I note that the events you're describing happened now more than 20 years ago. This is not a hostile question, but why the long gestation period to produce the book, and why are you telling us this story now?
I started writing this book 4 years ago, and it came up because I never aspired to be a writer, but everyone loved hearing these stories. So I've got a daughter who's 7 now, and my wife is a pediatrician, and she had to do a massive amount of college, and I did the opposite. I went and was a wooden boat builder, and we both have great careers, and I thought, well, I'd love for my daughter to read a story like this. It doesn't have to be mine, and give her that confidence to make her own adventure in life and choose the path that she's passionate about. So, yeah, it certainly was prolonged and why it took so long, but once I decided to do it, I got to work.
Yeah, hi. Thanks very much. Just out of curiosity, how and where were the storm shots shot in the film?
In Master and Commander, you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a fun question. So when Rose departed for California, Peter Weir put a film crew on the replica Endeavor, because Endeavor was going to sail around Cape Horn. And so the footage that you see in the film is a combination of the actual footage taken on Endeavor at Cape Horn. Also, there's CGI, and then there's also special effects because they built a full-scale replica of Surprise in the tank that they shot Titanic in. So it's the combination of those three elements. And also, there was also 2 20-foot models made, one of Surprise and one of the Archeron.
Before dismasting, how high did you point?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say, we were running when we were sailing, so we weren't really pointing. We had the wind off of our quarter, but I don't think, I think everyone here probably knows you don't really try and point a square rigger. It's a bit of a, it's a spoon pushing its way through the water instead of a knife cutting. We're just going to get the mic. Sorry.
We've got 2 questions.
Just curious how tight the hull was when she went in the water. How much were you fighting the infiltration of water into the hull?
Well, Rose took on a lot of water, And I think that she wasn't constructed the same as the HMS Rose would have been constructed. She was more a bit of a prop, and she flexed quite a bit. We were taking on a fair amount of water. There's also, I think, the challenge of we did rebuild the bilge pump manifold running through the boat, but the bilges were filled with concrete ballast. So you had this flat bilge surface with a wide span. And so what happened with all that rolling, in addition to just the water coming on, was it was really hard to keep those pumps primed. So these like sort of side waves on the ship's interior that were just building and building. It was a lot.
We have a tall ship based out of New Bedford that just came back from Maine after a total refit. And it's an interesting story about the lumber that went into that refit. I'm wondering, are there any stories about where the lumber came from to refit the HMS Rose?
You know what? I'm going to hand my mic to Captain Bailey because he was active in that rebuild.
Well, in the late 80s rebuild, the water company in Connecticut, Bridgeport Hydraulic Company, was cutting down 110 acres of forest. And because my boss was so well connected with state politics, he somehow convinced them to deliver all the white oak logs to our construction site. And we bought one of those Texas chainsaw massacre sawmills, I call it. And we would chainsaw logs into 5-inch flitches. We were doing this under steel construction framing, that you use for a building, staging framing, and that was covered with tarps. And then one winter gale, it all lifted up and blew away. So that was exciting. That was the framing was white oak, Connecticut white oak, and then the hull planking was not the best choice. It was walmanized or pressure-treated hard pine. That's probably enough to say about that.
What did you eat and where did you eat?
Can you say it into the microphone for us?
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
What did you eat and where did you eat?
We ate 3 hot squares a day. We had a cantankerous cook on board. His name was Hunter. Some of you might know Hunter here. And he was a tough man, but I could see how it worked, and I followed his rules. But I think I probably ate about 5,000 calories a day on the ship, and it was delicious and wonderful. Food was great, and we mostly ate our meals on the gun deck there, where there were the tables where the cannons would be mounted on. That's where the crew ate their meals. No, on the gun deck, the first sub deck of the ship. Any more questions? What classifies a ship as a tall ship? That is a tough question to answer. When I was researching this book, I was really sort of trying to find a finite definition, because you've got Tall Ships America and you've got your European counterparts and stuff, and there's really, I think the best sort of overall definition I found is a traditionally rigged large vessel with multiple masts. But if you look through the Tall Ships America catalog, for example, you'll still find some sloops that are part of the program.
So it's high time for your next adventure. What's that going to be?
Let's see, the next adventure. Well, my daughter's 7, so let me tell you, she really keeps me busy. I am starting work on my next book, which I'm really excited about. It's going to be, I'm just doing the research, but the publisher's given me the green light, and it's going to be about the lost art of apprenticeship in America. And that means that I'm going to be traveling the country trying to find young people and how they're choosing to live their lives and develop a trade or a skill through the process of learning and doing. I'm very excited about traveling the country for that.
To be clipped in on the way up the Ratlins, or did were you always clipped into a harness?
So when we sailed Rose, now let me just bear in mind, safety was always a priority on the ship. But 20 years ago was a different era of sailing. So we had these thick belts that we called backbreakers. It's different today, where the crews on the ships, they use proper climbing harnesses, and there's definitely been more standards set to make sure that ascending and descending the rig is a much safer operation. But on Rose, when we sailed her 20 years ago, we free climbed the ratlins going up the rig, and you clipped in. Once you got to where you were supposed to be, you were supposed to clip in. And on the yard, there was a line called the back rope that you would clip onto. But I don't know anyone who's fallen off a yard with the back rope clipped on, but I mean, I'm sure it'd be quite the jerk, and probably why we called those belts backbreakers. All right, is that it for questions? Oh. Would I do it again? Oh, well, hell yeah, I'd do it again if I didn't know I was doing it. I think the question was, what was our average speed? I think we Rose averaged somewhere between 9 and 12 knots, and definitely when we were sliding down some of those waves, I'm sure that there was some bursts up to maybe 15, but I'd say around 9 to 12.
Hi, could you say more about what you did at MIT?
Yeah, I did a couple of research projects at MIT, learning. I'm sure everyone knows about Nat Hairsoff. He never actually drew the lines plans for his designs. He would carve a model, and then he would draw his construction plans, but he'd take the offsets from the models, and he was an efficient man, so there's no reason to draw the shape of the boat because he already had the offsets. So I worked with Kurt Hasselback, who's the curator of the Hafenreffer collection, and I started to develop lines plans for his designs, especially ones that we didn't have any visual reference of. And after doing that for a couple of years, I was offered the opportunity to write a syllabus and teach a course which was accredited, and I did that for 10 years. And then I also did a research project for them studying photogrammetry, which is using photographs to construct 3D models. And then also just sort of worked on studying open source software for modeling.
How long did the voyage? How long did it take?
The voyage took 36 days. For me, though, it was a 6-month project. I mean, I think a big part of sailing, like anyone will know here, especially with any sailors who are getting ready to do the Marion Bermuda race, is that there's a lot of prep that goes into getting underway, and also after your adventure. As much as we all want to hit the bars, there's a lot to do on both ends. Is that it? Oh.
You mentioned the total square foot of sails. Who made the sails for you? What was the material they used? And did you have any machines aboard if you had to make repairs during your trip?
The sails are made from like a kind of a Dacron material. What was it called, Captain Bailey?
It was the prototype for Oceanus.
So prototype for Oceanus, and the sails were machine made, but a lot of things, sailing on a vessel like Rose, a lot of crew members had a good amount of marlin experience and sail making experience. So yeah, any repairs were done on board, and there was also a lot of instructional opportunity to learn how to improve your marlinship.
Do you own a boat today, and where do you call home? Where do you and your family live?
I do own a boat today. I own a Pearson 33-2. It's the second generation. Great boat. Love it. And I've got it with 2 partners. One of the partners was that 16-year-old that you guys saw doing the bungee jumping with, who's become one of my dearest friends in life. And I now call Santa Barbara, California, home. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I love this museum. I'm going to come back tomorrow. I can't wait to bring my daughter to it, and I really appreciate all the people here who work to make this museum possible and work, because it's just a beautiful asset and a wonderful contribution to the community. So thank you.